to be terribly vital and important, and everybody else just doesn't see it, doesn't believe you, doesn't care to see, right? Isn't willing to look and test whether or not it could be true. So lo and behold, I'm in that fantasy myself sometimes, living in a world where it seems that everybody else is asleep and going in a different direction than where perhaps we need to look and what we need to really pay attention to. But what comforts me is the recognition that these teachings bring. And what I mean by these teachings, the great faith traditions, the great wisdom traditions that really center on that great titular statement that was above the cave at the Delphi Oracle in Greece, know thyself, right? This idea of self-knowledge, looking at yourself, is really at the heart of these teachings. So whenever I find myself in states of discomfort or challenge or anxiety, it's really to turn and look at myself rather than outward at others that gives me abilities to manage my anxiety or deal with whatever's blocking me from that happiness or that joy in the immediacy of the moment. So we're going to be talking about this in many different ways this morning. We're going to be looking at some inspiring quotes, I think, from the book of Urantia, or the Urantia book. But then we're going to jump into Jungian psychology, the teachings of the Fourth Way, or G.I. Gurdjieff, and some of the teachings of the mother, the co-founder of Integral Yoga. So enjoy the ride, I hope, and let's get started. But this idea of challenge and dealing with certain things that do come up, especially if you're on the path of wanting to know yourself, right? This is what really is what Jesus called the narrow way that leads to Zoe, to true life, right? So the narrow way, few find it, we're told in the Gospels. But really few care to look. This is back to that, terrifying experience of being in a fantasy where no one wants to look. But this way of passage is narrow, and as we get into the teachings of Carl Jung, we'll see why. But here we will just prime the pump with some of the quotes from the book of Urantia. Difficulties may challenge mediocrity and defeat the fearful, but they only stimulate the true children of the Most High. So again, difficulties may challenge mediocrity, and that's really what they're designed to do, yes? They're designed, these challenges, these difficulties, whether it's in the form of illness, family breakdowns, financial situations that are very difficult to deal with, whatever stressors we are facing in our life, they're really to move us beyond our level of mediocrity, of acquiescing and staying asleep. They're designed to stir the inner flame so that we can live into our potential, that we are gods in the making, as all of these sacred traditions say, that we are Buddha, unaware of itself. And so difficulties come to bring us to that place where we get to that choice point where you have either to choose to stay asleep, and you know that, or you choose to wake up, very much akin to that famous moment in that first Matrix movie where Morpheus is holding out the two pills. Which one will you take? Do you want to come out of the Matrix? Do you want to see what it's all really about? Or do you want to go back to sleep in your mediocrity, in your quotidian reality where everything is mechanical and somnambulant? A little bit more here from the Urantia book. Blind and unforeseen accidents do not occur in the cosmos. Neither do the celestial beings assist the lower being who refuses to act upon his light of truth. So, again, there are no accidents in the cosmos. And we always have this higher help waiting to intervene. These spiritual beings, or celestial beings as they're referred to here, these higher parts of ourself are waiting to bring assistance aspiration, elevation, safety, protection. But if we don't act upon our own light of truth, it's like we shut ourselves off from that. Right? In the Jewish tradition of the Kabbalah, one of the things that developed within the medieval Kabbalah is this recognition that in order for the above, the supernal realms, to stir into action, the realms below, that means our human realm, needs to trigger that stirring. So God waits upon us to give him, her, to the green light to come into our life. So we are, in many ways, as the decision maker, at the switchboard of whether or not these influences begin to come into our life or not. Right? And this is a moment by moment choice. Right? Here's another. Effort does not always produce joy, but there is no happiness without intelligent effort. The greatest affliction of the cosmos is never to have been afflicted. Mortals only learn wisdom by experiencing tribulation. So I don't know what it's like in your world and how you have come to these teachings and how deep these teachings are impacting your life and how devoted you may be to this awakening process. But the people that I usually have talked to over the years have really only come to this, above all else, choice point when they have been at such a crossroads of dire challenge, right? And so he's saying, or they're saying in these teachings, we cannot learn this higher wisdom without being shaken up, without being broken up, without being let down, without being betrayed or lost or in a place of mortal fear and trepidation. That oftentimes, again, we're part animal. And when we're asleep in the animal nature, we just like everything to be copacetic. And it's just numb me out, put on my favorite show, give me my favorite food. I want bodies next to me that I love and love me. And that can be great. And then when all of that sort of begins to quake or go away, we're faced with this abyss of not knowing ourselves, and all of our comforts and securities begin to fall away. And who are we in the face of that? What have we cultivated as far as our spiritual knowing? And that's exactly what we're going to experience at death's door. When you're ready to take your last breath of mortal existence, as they say in Buddhism and other traditions, all you take with you are your virtues that you've cultivated and your state of mind. That's what you carry out of here. The virtues that you've cultivated, or the vices, and your state of mind. So these shocks that we get along our mortal journey are very helpful, as Plato or Socrates, Plato would say through Socrates, that all of this greater philosophy is a preparation for death. So when you're getting these shocks, when you're having these challenges, when you're faced with these riddling anxieties, these are all mini deaths. And they are also fire within the furnace or crucible, so that you can produce that alchemical philosopher's stone, your spirit, your true soul, your true self, right? Stars are best discerned from the lonely isolation of experiential depths, not from the illuminated and ecstatic mountaintops. So again, just kind of playing on this theme, you can't really see the lights above without having gone into the depths below, right? That we root to rise. In order to really know the heights, we also have to know the depths. This is very much what we're going to see in the Jungian psychology. You cannot know yourself until you've opened up your own unconscious and begin to face those denizens within your own unconscious. They're yours. And what we've been accustomed to within the surface personality is throwing all of those forces and identities and dynamics outside of ourselves, and we're this little self. And the world is a big place, and we're not really interacting with parts of ourselves. We're interacting with these separated and fragmented others. And I remember when I first got on this path back in the very early 1990s, and I picked up a book that I'll be sharing from this morning, what is it, The Way of the Miraculous, In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky. I got that book in 92, and when I started reading the work of Gurdjieff, I mean, I was a Catholic boy that didn't really live the Catholic faith, but that was all I knew. I thought God had everything under control. You know, it was all good. I could do my own thing, and until I reached that crisis. And when I began to read these books that teach about self-knowledge and deeper looking, it really shook me to my core, because I realized it was really depending on me. Like, I can't hide from myself, and I have to look at what I've made of my life. Like, that's very confronting. And many of us are like, yes, that's exactly what it is. Others are like, no, I don't want to hear this. Get me out of here. But I got you. Doors are closed. You're all mine for an hour. But the real point is, as he says, effort won't always produce joy, but you cannot have happiness without effort. So in the beginning, it feels like you're taking your descent, you're facing your shadow, you're dealing with your darkness and the struggles and the fears that we were avoiding all of our life, trying to numb out, trying to run away, trying to distract into trivia. And then the crisis point oftentimes is that open door where we have to look. And when we do, it takes a lot of effort to move through some of these patterns and dysfunctions and fears. But that effort does bring you to sunnier shores if you stay on the path, right? That's the only true happiness. You have to go through the dark night in order to get to the other side, right? This is a perennial path. It's an ancient path. I am not saying anything that hasn't been known for millennia. This is just the rule of the road. Couple more here. You cannot perceive spiritual truth until you feelingly experience it. And many truths are not really felt except in adversity. So again, this is, sort of that alchemical, or in the East they call it Tantra, where you're embracing the challenge. The challenge is actually the blessing in disguise. The blessing is appearing as challenge. But when you have the right framing of the situation, the poison becomes medicine. It's all in how you're interpreting it. So even these long-standing patterns, like if you find yourself in this well-dug rut of interacting with a loved one, a spouse, a mother, a sibling, that is just so toxic or so debilitating to your peace of mind or whatever that may be, like that's where the gold is. This is your laboratory. This is your ashram. To work in that relationship by bringing more awareness that this is my shadow oftentimes that I'm refusing to look at, that these are my own unconscious parts that I am not willing to face and accept about myself. And so I'm making the other person hold my darkness, hold my anger, hold my fear. And so this is where greater self-awareness, right? The part of the self-knowledge comes with self-observation. In other words, you begin to step, this is one of Gurdjieff's main teachings, you begin to step out of yourself as the character or persona or personality, and you begin to watch the character like you're watching a movie. And so when you're interacting with your mother or your sibling or your spouse, instead of going unconscious and falling asleep in the role and the reactive personality, you kind of pop out and you're like, oh my God, that's what I look like? And you begin to see that now, because the personality is an object in your awareness and you're not bought into it as the subjective experience, you can then have the perspective of being able to work on it and tweak it and change it and make different decisions and take it down a different track, even in that very moment of the toxic interaction that could be decades in the making. You can have a new birth in that moment, in that relationship. But it depends on you. The stirring from above and that celestial or higher self help can only come in when you're ready. And you're not ready if you're bought into the drama and the trauma and the judgment and the blame. You have to pop out of the persona. And then you can have that access to the vertical relationship and bring to bear on that unconscious part of you greater force, greater illumination, greater truth, greater love. Last one. That was the last one. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think most of us here have heard of Carl Jung. And Jung was a unique figure in the early part of the 20th century, the first half of our Western civilization, because as a protege of really, Freud wanted him to become the heir apparent of psychoanalysis, and Jung broke away from the Freudian school because he saw the shortcomings that Freud couldn't see in himself. And what Jung recognized that Freud refused was that all of our neuroses and problems didn't just stem from a personal unconscious, that there was a greater collective unconscious that also operated at spiritual depths and dimensions. And these great archetypes of the different religions and wisdom traditions were showing up cross-culturally, because just like we have, all of us, no matter where we are on the planet, one heart, two lungs, two kidneys, we have this internal structure that is universally the same as biological human Homo sapiens. Jung postulated that we also have these similar organ structures within our psyche, so that when we get into certain layers of the unconscious mind, we trigger the hero archetype, we trigger the goddess archetype, the wise teacher or wizard archetype, the young child archetype. These are all organs within the psychological system of human beings collectively. And not only did Jung see it within the human strata, but he says if you keep going down, you get into the animal strata and every other history that's connected to the birth of the cosmos is within our own unconscious, that we are microcosmos, that we are the miniature replica, the holographic expression of the entirety of the cosmos. And so the journey, or the path of individuation, as Jung would refer to it, is to reconnect to your own universal nature and integrate that within your conscious personality, to wake up as the universal human, the awakened being, the liberated self, right? Not the repressed, anxious, neurotic self. But our inheritance is truly divine. And as St. Paul says in a few of his epistles, everything is yours. Life, death, heaven and hell, everything is yours. You are the holographic being. So think of this inheritance when, like we were just looking in the Urantia book, that you begin to feel and experience these forces and entities and levels of consciousness as your own self. That's quite tremendous, right? That's a far cry from mediocrity. So that's why these challenges come, because you're not at home in mediocrity. You're not at home in littleness. And so as you go through these challenges and experience them, know that they're taking you to the greatest happy ending ever. Like, this is really what these teachings are designed to have us see. That even though we're going to go through trials and tribulations, the outcome is bliss, eternal. So just a little bit here. I'm reading from the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. So we're just going to focus in a little bit on what Jung says about the shadow, okay? Because the reason why I bring it up here is because it's the first stop along the highway to knowing yourself. So as you turn your face around, right, which is the true meaning of the word repentance, right, teshuva or metanoia in the Hebrew or the Greek, you turn your face away from the surface world and you begin to go into the depths. That's the beginning of true religion or true awakening. You got to turn your face around. You're looking at the shadows on the cave wall, to use Plato. And so in order to find the meaning of these shadows, you have to go in. And the first thing that you confront is the shadow maker, right? The shadow itself. Listen to this. So, the unconscious is commonly regarded as a sort of encapsulated fragment of our own most personal and intimate life, something like what the Bible calls the heart, and considers the source of all evil thoughts. In the chambers of the heart dwell the wicked blood spirits, swift anger, and sensual weakness. This is how the unconscious looks when seen from the conscious side, right? So these uncontrollable, irascible, lusty emotions that control the life, right? Pull us into directions of self-degradation or disaster. This is how the unconscious looks when seen from the conscious side. But consciousness appears to be essentially an affair of the cerebrum, right, at the brain. And so that cliche statement, like the longest journey you're ever going to take is from the head to the heart. Like, this is our journey, right? We're to drop, as the Greek Orthodox will say in the Philokalia, you're to drop the head or the mind, really the brain, into the heart. And by doing that, you have a completely different framing of the present situation. You're now going to be looking at it from your depth rather than from the surface. And like we looked at last week, we also touched a bit on Jung. We were looking at what he demarcated as the number one and the number two personalities. The number one personality, remember, is the pretender, the liar, the one that stays on the surface and lost in conceptualization, cultural identity, role-playing within life. The number two personality is ancient. And we all have it. We all are in contact with these two personalities. Unfortunately, we are unaware most of the time of the number two personality. And so to begin to really embody it, we have to take this descent from the head to the heart. Hence, it is generally believed that anyone who descends into the unconscious gets into a suffocating atmosphere of egocentric subjectivity, and in this blind alley is exposed to the attack of all the ferocious beasts which the caverns of the psychic underworld are supposed to harbor, right? So one of the things, and if you are familiar with A Course in Miracles, he says one of the things that the ego is sure to do is attack any idea that brings self-liberation. So one of the things the ego will do is protect itself as the separate identity, the surface personality, by having you think that if you were to actually look at who you really are, you would be struck dead with fear. Right? That's what he says in A Course in Miracles. And he says in the chorus, what if you actually did look and there was no sin, there was no evil there? What if you actually looked and found the light and the joy of God abiding within you? Like, it's, again, I hate to keep jumping all over the place, but it's like that story that Buddha tells in the Lotus Sutra, where two friends go out and get drunk, and before the other friend wakes up, his buddy sews the priceless gem within the lapel of his shirt. And the guy is wandering destitute all of these years, eating out of garbage, and he's got this priceless gem. But he's never discovered it. It's right there. It's closer to him than anything else. And yet undiscovered. In fact, Jung wrote a book, The Undiscovered Self. This is the gem we all have, this ancient personality that owns everything, is the one self in all creation, divine. Light, joy, and peace abide as this self. And we wander in this impoverishment, thinking that what we need is out there. We need to repent. I say repent! So now this gets juicy. So, we love these stories too, like these fairy tales and, Tolkien and, all these myths that really do use the archetypal images in such creative, fantastical ways. So think of this kind of mythic fairy tale environment as your own personal narrative now as you begin to cross the threshold into this personal journey of, becoming the awakened hero or warrior or sage. So true, Jung says, whoever looks into the mirror of the water will first of all see his own face. So you take this journey into the depth, and the first thing you're going to come across is this reflection pool within the unconscious. Now, this is all symbolic, right? It's metaphor. But the first thing you're going to see is your own face, as it really is, Jung says. So this is what we were talking about earlier, when you can pop out of the persona during an argument or an anxiety attack or whatever it is, and you begin to look at the persona as an object, and you begin to really see what its motivations are, what's making it act this way, why it's feeling this way. Clear seeing. You're not trying to validate or, make excuses for or turn away from some of these, character flaws or things that need cleaning up in your life. So what Jung is saying is this is all in congruence with looking at this face reflected in the mirror. You begin to really see how you operate. So he says, the mirror does not flatter. Right? This is a direct confrontation with oneself. It does not flatter. The mirror faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely the face we never show to the world because we cover it with the persona, with the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows us our true face. Again, to use a more current mythological motif, if you remember that third installment of Star Wars where Darth Vader meets his death by Luke's lightsaber, and he tells Luke to take off his mask. Darth Vader was the epitome of the company man. He was the executive. He worked for the establishment. He was at the highest level of the establishment, powerful, intimidating, a black sheen to his persona. Everybody feared and trembled in his presence and greatly respected and admired him. He was the greatest force to be reckoned with in the establishment. But now that he was at his low point and dying, he asks Luke to take off his mask, and what do you find? You find a shriveled, distorted, grotesque human being that never really flowered, that was withering under the mask. And so when you look into this mirror of your own psyche, the mirror that lies behind the mask, this is what we will see, the parts of ourselves that we don't want the world to look at. He goes on. This confrontation is the first test of courage on the inner way. Now, listen carefully, right? Looking into the mirror behind the mask, seeing your true face that you refuse to accept or allow the world to see. So this is the first test of courage. And Jung tells us a test sufficient to frighten off most people. Instead of Neo taking the red pill and really looking at what the situation of the world is, and remember when he has to pull all that stuff out of himself? Like, this is his real, like, the shriveled, withered self that hasn't seen the sunlight of truth yet. He's just coming out of the womb of that second birth. Right? Are you following? Is this making sense? So, most of us, you meet that character later on in the Matrix movie, Cypher, who's like, why didn't I take the blue pill? I wanted to go back to sleep. I don't want this life. It's too much looking, too confrontational, right? That's why Jesus says, the way that leads to life is narrow and few find it, right? Because they run away from that confrontation of looking at themselves. But the way that leads to death is broad, and many go on that way. And it looks like a happy way, doesn't it? There's a proverb in the Old Testament that says, everything looks right in the eyes of the man, even though the way that looks right leads to death. And so we have to do this deep inner scrutiny when confronting ourselves, because oftentimes we are validating or valuing what is blocking our spiritual evolution. So again, it says this test of courage, looking at yourself, is sufficient to frighten off most people, for the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided so long as we can project everything negative into the environment. Right? So this is what we've been talking about a lot, is that the world is a feedback system. It's a big mirror, right? We're all in a house of mirrors. And so when we're projecting our evil out onto the world, it does look like the politician that I can't stand. It does look like the people who are ruining the planet. It does look like my mother who never listens to me. And this is the feedback. And so what Jung is saying is, when you confront yourself, you take responsibility for the situation in government. Right? Plato said, people deserve the government they get. If we remain asleep and stay unconscious, we're going to have unconscious, psychopathic governments. It all brings to bear on us. We must take responsibility. It's our own negativity that we're not integrating that seems to be running amok out there. Right? So this is what Jung is saying. Confront your shadow, take responsibility, rather than projecting everything negative into the environment. That's what's really poisoning the planet. Okay. Enough of this cheerful message. We're going to take a turn now. But if we are able to see our own shadow and can bear knowing about it, then a small part of the problem has already been solved. We have at least brought up the personal unconscious. The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. The problem, or rather this problem, is exceedingly difficult because it not only challenges the whole person, but reminds him at the same time of his helplessness and ineffectuality. So again, what we were reading about in the Urantia book is that when we are faced with affliction, when we are dealing with our own difficult struggles, these are the shadow aspects of ourself coming up. When we can meet that knowing that this is for our evolution, for our awakening, then this sense of helplessness brings us to the next very crucial point in the journey, is surrendering to the power greater than ourselves. Right? That's really the key to awakening, is to realize that I am not this lower self. I have to look at it. I have to get the full brunt of the impact that operating in this unconscious lower self, what it's doing to my life. But then I surrender that to the greater power. Jung says strong natures, or should one rather call them weak, do not like to be reminded of being helpless and ineffectual, but prefer to think of themselves as heroes who are beyond good and evil, and to cut the Gordian knot instead of untying it. Nevertheless, the account has to be settled sooner or later. In the end, one has to admit that there are problems which one simply cannot solve on one's own resources. Right? That's what, coming down with a disease, a medical crisis, these deep depressions, these things that hit us like a tsunami. Like, it's that opening to grace. It's a shock sufficient to the blessing that can then come. Remember, the poison is the medicine. It's all on how we're framing it. Wouldn't that then make you unstoppable in the face of all of these challenges, if you were to really get the secret code behind all of the problems that you're facing? That this is what you've been asking for, showing up, just not in the form that you thought it would? Finally here, such an admission, right, of your need to surrender. You can't solve this on your own resources. Such an admission has the advantage of being honest, truthful, and in accord with reality. And this prepares the ground for a compensatory reaction from the collective unconscious, right? From above. You are now more inclined to give heed to a helpful idea or intuition, or to notice thoughts which had not been allowed to voice themselves before. You're humbled. You're open. You're now willing to not pay such close attention to your voice, the voice of the ego. Now you're looking for the presence of God showing up in your life. Without that challenge, without that devastating situation, we would have stayed asleep. So the next stop along the way is the reality of being. This is actually one of the main students of Gurdjieff, Jeanne de Salzman. And we're just going to read a little bit of her opening statement here in this very good book. I recommend it if you're into looking at these deeper teachings. So this is the section, I do not know myself. Who am I? I need to know. If I do not know, what meaning does my life have? And what in me responds to life? So I must try to answer, to see who I am. First, my thought steps back and brings suggestions about myself. I am a man or a woman who can do this, who has done that, who possesses this and that. My thinking volunteers possible answers from all that it knows. But it does not know what I am, does not really know me in this moment, my thinking. Then I turn to my feeling. It's among the centers most capable of knowing. Can it answer? My feeling is not free. It has to obey the me, who wants to be the greatest, the most powerful, and who suffers all the time from not being first. So my feeling does not dare. It is afraid, or it doubts. How can it know? Then, of course, there's my body, the capacity to sense my body. But am I my body? In fact, I do not know myself. I do not know what I am. That's your Zen koan. That's what you sit with. And it can become very gnawing and confronting in and of itself, the fact that we are operating mechanically. That if you were to really examine your life, most of what we consider to be our identity is prescripted, conditioned, learned, taken in by osmosis. Even your very name was given to you. It is not who you are, but it's become so ingrained, just like all of our conditioning and our cultural appropriation. It's been so ingrained that we are mechanically, unconsciously aping our life. So that's why, we crave these teachings deep down, because the number 2 personality, your eternal self, is where the treasure is where the joy is where the peace is, the abundance, the safety. So we're never really satisfied or at home within this mechanical, sleeping existence. So the question, who am I, can become this burning iron to cut through a lot of the false webbing that we have within our consciousness that blocks us from seeing who we really are. She goes on a little bit more here. I do not know what I am. I know neither my possibilities nor my limitations. I exist, yet I do not know how I am existing. I believe my actions are affirming my own existence, yet I am always responding to life with only one part of myself. I react either emotionally or intellectually or physically, and it is never really I who responds. I also believe I am moving in the direction I want to go and that I can do, but in fact, I am acted upon, moved by forces that I know nothing about. Everything in me takes place. Everything happens. The strings are pulled without my knowing. I do not see that I am like a puppet, a machine set in motion by influences from outside. At the same time, I sense my life passing as if it were the life of another person. I vaguely see myself being agitated, hoping, regretting, afraid, bored, all without feeling that I am taking part. Most of the time, I act without knowing it and realize only afterward that I said this or did that. So there's an example given in Search of the Miraculous where Ouspensky is learning Gurdjieff's technique of self-remembering, where you're watching yourself, you're conscious of your action. You're conscious when you pick up the water. You're awake when you're opening the water cap. You're present, right? So this is the self-remembering. So things are happening at the level of form, and at the same time you have that higher witnessing perspective that is aware that it is the witness witnessing what's happening at the level of the body and the form, the emotions, etc. So in the story, Ouspensky's trying to practice this, and he realizes when he comes home from work and he takes off his socks and he's getting ready to go in the shower. And as he's disrobing, he's like, I'm present now. But from the moment I left the house this morning, I was like in a trance. He went through the whole day at work, interacting with people, doing all of the routine situations of his life. And when he got home, he realized that was all in trance. He wasn't aware. He wasn't present. And so this is how these teachings are saying we're living our life. We're living our life in a trance, mechanistically, robotically. Right? And so confronting that is at the same time joyful and painful. Because now you can begin to come out of the sleep. And then you have to see that you're the one who has been avoiding the self that you always are, right? We'll get more into that in just a few minutes if we have time. It unfolds while I sleep, this life of mine. From time to time, jolts or shocks awaken me for an instant. In the middle of an angry outburst or grief or danger, I suddenly open my eyes. What? It's me here in this situation, living this, right? Like you get the worst news of your life and you come out of the trance. You're present, you're clear. But after the shock, she says, I go back to sleep. And a long time can pass before a new shock awakens me. As my life passes, I may begin to suspect that I am not what I believe. I am a being who is asleep, a being with no consciousness of herself. In this sleep, I confuse intellect, the thought functioning independent from feeling, with intelligence. Just because we have the lingo of the spiritual teachings and the concepts, she's saying, that's still sleep. Just having lingo is still sleeping. Like we were seeing in the Urantia book, you have to experientially feel these energies, awake to them. My functions, my thoughts, feelings, and movements work without direction, subject to random shocks and habits. It is the lowest state of being for a human. I live in my own narrow, limited world, commanded by associations from all my subjective impressions. This is a prison to which I always return. My prison. So, before we go on, you know this if you've been coming here for any time, that this is the service where you get to experience what's behind the mask, right? A lot of services, a lot of churches will still cater to your mask. And you come in as the mask, you enjoy the service as the mask, and you go home as the mask. And for a time and in a certain period of life, that is very appropriate. And it's what's needed because it encourages you to look behind the mask. Nothing is by accident. Everything can be used for the good. But there gets to a point when maybe that question starts to show up. Yeah, but who am I really? Like, what's life really about? Like, how am I going to get over this that's now in front of me? And this is when the deeper teaching begins to go, there is another way of seeing this. You can come to the 8 o'clock service. Or you can go to Monday at 7:15 for A Course in Miracles. This is the invitation, right? And if you act now, I'll throw in a free t-shirt and a coffee mug. That's right. All right, so finishing here with Jeanne de Salzman. Am I only this image that I affirm? Is there really no I who could be present? In order to respond, I need to know myself, to have a direct experience of knowing myself. First, I have to see the obstacles that stand in the way. I must see that I believe in my mind, my thinking. I believe that my mind and my thinking is the I. Again, this is what Zen will help you cut through, right? This quiet sitting where you have the koan such as, who am I? And what Zen is doing is whatever you're throwing up as an answer, right? The surface personality is going to have to exhaust itself. It's going to run that program ad nauseum. And as you're sitting there in silent observation, you're watching the program exhaust itself. None of these answers really get to the heart. They can't scratch the itch. And that's when you have your satori. You break through the cocoon of false thinking. First, I have to see the obstacles that stand in the way. I must see that I believe in my mind, my thinking. I believe it is I. I wish to know. I have read. I have understood. All this is the expression of the false I, my ordinary I. It is my ego that prevents me from opening to consciousness, from seeing what is and what I am. My effort to awaken cannot be forced. We are afraid of emptiness, afraid to be nothing. And so we make an effort to be otherwise. But who makes this effort? So remember what we were saying just a moment ago, that when we are willing to take that deeper teaching and go and look behind the mask, that false I gets broken up. It begins to dissolve. And in the dissolving of the ego, or undergoing what some teachings would call ego death, you're faced with thinking, well, then there's nothing? And I hear the words of Chogyam Trungpa at this time. The bad news is you're in a total free fall. The good news is there is no ground. So in other words, all the boundaries drop away, and you realize that you could stretch out and relax as the empty space, as this beautiful womb of all possibility. This great, brilliant, luminous awareness that is everything, right? This is the self that can never be threatened, and it's the self at the heart of all beings. Shivoham. That is the breakthrough, when we realize that this false little I, with all of its petty concerns and addiction to trivia, has been blocking me from the treasure that I am. Right? I and the Father are one. Was that just for Jesus to say? No, we're to be brothers and co-heirs with him. Right? We are to be of the same blood as that. So finally, we are afraid of emptiness, afraid to be nothing, and so we make an effort to be otherwise. But who makes this effort? I must see that this too comes from my ordinary I. All forcing comes from the ego. I must no longer be fooled by an image or an ideal that is imposed by the mind. I need to accept emptiness, accept to be nothing, accept what is. In this state, the possibility of a new perception of myself appears. Right? You go into the nothingness or the womb, and you have your new birth. Right? But at first, if you love your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you'll find it. You have to be born again. You have to be born from above. So if you've gotten any message this morning, repent and be born again. I rest my case. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, we thank you for clicking on that link below and donating to the 8 a.m. service. Thank you for supporting us, but you don't get a coffee mug or a free t-shirt for doing so. Any thoughts, questions, or comments? Yes.
You were talking about Carl Jung, and he was talking about our ancient selves.
Yes, the ancient self.
Talking about archetypes.
Yes.
And I was wondering, as our ancient self evolves through, say, different incarnations, do the archetypes change and evolve also, or do they always stay constant?
So as the ancient self evolves, you said, do the archetypes evolve as well? Well, I would say that in his view, the archetypes are like these fixed constellations within the psyche. They are the thoughts of God, the eidolon of Plato, like these ideas that are eternal. So they provide the structure or the great pattern for all life. So they don't change. As we ascend that spiral of time and come back into union with the infinite God, we will undergo mutations and changes. It'll appear as if, we're changing. But the true self, when we do realize it, is changeless. It's just in the pathway of getting there that it seems to change. But those changes are, just part of the growing process until full flowering. So it's paradoxical is the answer. Does that help? Okay, good. Good. We bless the offering and we charge it with the intention to bring light and life to all that it may touch in whatever form that may be, so we all may come to know our true wisdom and our true self. And so it is. Amen. Thank you. Okay. Ready to seal the deal? Rise, my friends. Awake from sleep. And as we bring the mind into the heart, within that inner sanctuary of stillness, where all life resides at the source of the fountain within the heart, we come to know that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thank you all so very much. Course in Miracles tomorrow night, 7:15. In case you didn't get that before, see you there. Bye for now. Oh, and the new Bible class starts on Wednesday. See me if you're interested.